Fire's just started crackling. And that's good, 'cause it's getting cold outside, and my old heater just ain't what it used to be. Welcome, once again, to Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get some great stories together to help keep you warm on this very chilly day. I figure, in the spirit of the season, we'll tell one of the few Thanksgiving stories that I have. Though be warned, it might put you off your turkey and cranberry sauce this year. Have you ever wondered how exactly the turkeys get there? I know I have sometimes. I've been to turkey farms, but our good friends at Bright Farms have a much better solution. So be a little wary about that Bright Farms label. You never know what comes field to table. Dave knew something was off from the moment the knife sliced into the turkey, but he put it out of his mind as he served the meat to his guests. It was nerves, he told himself. This was their first year hosting the family Thanksgiving, his family and his in-laws both being in attendance, and as Dave tasted the expertly cooked bird, he set his fears to rest. It was delicious, one of the best turkeys he'd ever eaten, and he pushed the mashed potatoes onto the golden flesh as he shoveled it into his mouth. The table had been lengthened for their guests, and the whole clan sat around as they talked, laughed, and ate. Dave looked around at the gathering and was glad they had agreed to host this year. Normally, Thanksgiving was a hectic time for his family. They would start their day at 7:30, getting the girls ready so they could leave by 9 and arrive at his parents' house by 10. They would visit for a little while, having an early lunch at 11, leaving by 1 to arrive at her parents' house by 2. After some socializing, they would eat turkey dinner at 4, and she and her mother, sometimes with her younger sister in tow, would go out to hit the Black Friday deals while Dave and his brother-in-law Terry watched the kiddos. By the time they got back, Dave was exhausted and still stuffed from dinner, and God help him if his office didn't give him the next day off, because he'd be good for little after all that. But that was before they'd bought the house. The house was so big and beautiful that it had just made sense to host both families and be done with it. Dave's mother was already planning to join the Black Friday festivities with Sylvia and her family, and Dave was looking forward to putting on his pajamas and relaxing after the meal was finally put away. The kids could play in the backyard or rest in the living room, the adults could get comfortable or head out to shop, and Dave could rest a little instead of going non-stop all day. Yup, Dave thought as he poured more gravy on his turkey, this year was gonna be different. It wasn't until he started putting away the leftovers that he remembered that funny feeling he'd got when he sliced the bird earlier. The green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, rolls, corn, and even the pumpkin pie that remained had been easily stored in Tupperware containers, so they could either go to various houses with his family members, or be returned to the fridge to make sandwiches and plates for the next few days. Dave was in his comfy pants, the sweats he liked to wear while he watched football or did house chores, and as his belly pushed at the waistband, he was once again happy that he didn't have to ride out the rest of the evening on his in-law's couch while his belly pushed at his jeans like a bloated whale. The electric knife buzzed as he cut the turkey, putting the pieces into an extra-large Tupperware. There was more than he'd expected, especially considering how much his guests had put away. Terry was currently snoring on the couch, his overshirt unbuttoned to reveal the rise and fall of his swollen stomach. Terry had eaten 4 helpings of the turkey all by himself, and between the lot of them, they should have eaten several turkeys. When the Tupperware was full, the lid barely closing on the almost 3-gallon container, Dave furrowed his brow at the still mostly whole turkey that sat on the counter. Halfway through filling another container, he heard Sylvia come back from her shopping adventure. "Well," she said, shopping bags fluttering as she came into the kitchen, "I had to knock some old lady over, and I'm pretty sure my face is hanging somewhere in a Walmart backroom of people to throw out, but I think I got everything on our kids' Christmas list." Her joking smile turned into something more akin to, "Really?" as she saw Dave putting away the turkey. "Had a little nap before you started on those leftovers, huh?" she asked playfully. "Nah," Dave said, his attention on the turkey as he carved a long piece and tossed it into the bucket. "I've been carving for hours." Sylvia whistled as she looked at the huge container of turkey already in the fridge. "My goodness, I guess my turkey wasn't up to par." Dave shook his head. "Watch this," his face very close to the area he had just cut off the turkey. As Sylvia turned her attention to the bird, It was hard to miss as the flesh grew back into the spot he had just cut. Sylvia let her mouth slip open, casting a glance at the kitchen door as her sister tried to coax Terry off the couch so they could return home. What the hell was that? I was hoping you could tell me. Where did you get this turkey? From Kroger. Same place I always get it. Dave went to the garbage, digging out the plastic covering and reading the label. It looked normal, a thin, flesh-colored bag with some plastic netting inside to hold the bird, but the label looked different than he was used to. A large Technicolor sun was rising up behind a barn, and the words Bright Farms were visible before it. Bright Farms wasn't a brand that Dave was familiar with, but as he watched Sylvia cut slice after slice off the turkey, he had to say it was a brand that was growing on him. Sylvia laughed at the large Tupperware as it bulged with bird meat. Weird, but in a good way. What do we do with all this meat? Dave shrugged. I'm sure this is just some kind of fluke. We'll enjoy it while it lasts. Do we put it in the fridge, you think? Would that ruin it? She asked, indicating the turkey. Dave just shrugged again, and the two made room for the almost full turkey as they closed everything up and went to bed. Dave figured that putting it in the cold would end whatever good fortune they had had, but he hardly wanted to wake up to a rotten turkey. Besides, it couldn't last forever. Ugh, turkey again? Ella asked, moving the turkey around her plate as she glowered at the golden meat. I like it, said Claire, their youngest, as she spooned mashed potatoes onto her plate. It's yummy. There are starving kids right here in town, Els, Dave said good-naturedly. Might as well eat. Wait, Ella said suddenly. This isn't the turkey from Thanksgiving, is it? Dave looked at Sylvia, the two sharing a look that their oldest daughter definitely noticed. That's disgusting. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks ago. There's no way it's still good. It was actually closer to 3, Dave realized, but time had done nothing to stop the turkey from coming back. Ella had raised an eye when she saw the thing sitting in the fridge still. It's fine, dear. Your father and I have eaten it, and it tastes just fine. Eat up before it gets cold. They had put it in the air fryer to heat it up, but it always came out just as crispy and golden as it had the first time. The meat never spoiled, even when Sylvia had accidentally left the Tupperware out overnight, and the family had carried on eating it. Dave found it delicious, and Sylvia had joked that she had outdone herself this year. They had been eating turkey regularly ever since Thanksgiving, and no one but Ella seemed to show any signs of stopping. I'll pass, Ella said, pushing the plate away. I've been having weird dreams lately. I think it might be the turkey. Dave started to chide her for wasting food, but he too had been having some pretty weird dreams. He couldn't say it was due to the turkey, but it certainly had played a part. Dave had woken up a few times in the kitchen, the fridge door open and pieces of turkey still in his hand. The dreams themselves were usually flashbacks to the Thanksgiving, watching the guests eat and eat as the turkey centerpiece grew to fill the table. The guests grew too, Dave included, though that part seemed grounded in reality. He'd put on 10 pounds in the last few weeks. But he had shrugged it off as holiday weight. With Thanksgiving over and Christmas quickly approaching, there were no end of holiday parties or potlucks at work. Dave watched as Clara took her sister's turkey, as Ella left to go to her room. Don't worry, Dad, Clara assured him. I won't let it go to waste. Dave smiled, ruffling his daughter's hair, but noticed a certain roundness to her face. Ella looked about the same as ever, but as Sylvia wolfed down her own turkey, Dave couldn't help but notice that his weight gain wasn't the only new addition to the family. He put it out of his mind as he returned to his dinner. It was just a little holiday weight. Nothing more. Dave pursed his lips when he opened the door to find his sister-in-law on the porch. It was the middle of the day. Shouldn't she be at work? Hey, Stacy, what's up? She smiled, but it looked a little strained. Hey, Dave, I was just wondering if you had any more of that turkey. She was trying to put it off as curiosity, but her demeanor made Dave think she was on drugs or something. She was shuffling from foot to foot and scratching her arm, and Dave was a little worried about her. She'd been coming around a lot lately, and he didn't think he'd ever seen her over quite so much. It appeared that Sylvia was giving her turkey. It wasn't like they didn't have plenty of it, but it appeared to be having a negative effect on her. Sure, I guess. Are you feeling okay? Seem kind of under the weather. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just hoping you've got some of that turkey. It's so good. I can't get enough of it. Terry, too. He's been taking it for lunch every day. As she followed him inside, rambling all the way, Dave noticed that he wasn't the only one that had put on a little holiday weight. Stacy had never been very large. At 4'11", she might have weighed 100 pounds the whole time Dave had known her, but now it was clear that she'd been eating more than usual. Her stick-thin frame was getting a little pudgy, and Dave wondered again if it had something to do with all the turkey they were eating. She followed him to the fridge, and sure enough, the turkey was still there in all its glory. The whole bird sat within as 2 tubs of meat sat on either side like silent sentries. He reached for the smaller tub, but changed his mind as he reached for the 2-gallon instead. He could always carve some more. If she had enough, maybe she wouldn't need to come back for a while. The thought was strange to Dave, but he suddenly found himself feeling very protective of the turkey. Stacy looked at the Tupperware of meat as if Dave had just handed her a stack of crisp $100 bills. Thank you so much, she breathed out, sounding relieved as she hugged the container to her chest. She left in a hurry after that, saying they would see them at Christmas for sure, and Dave was left wondering what the hell had just happened. As he watched her go, Dave suddenly wanted to call her back. He wanted to stop her, to tackle her, to take the turkey back, and as he closed the door, he ran heavily back to the fridge, his mind crying out for the delicious meat. He sank his hands into the turkey, pulling out chunks as he pushed it into his mouth. The turkey continued to refresh itself between each bite, the gouges growing before Dave's eyes, and when he sank to the floor at long last, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he'd never felt before. He was showering that night when he noticed the first of the bumps. He felt them through the washcloth as he soaped up, and his fingers shook a little as he dropped the wash rag. They were under his arms, a large patch that stretched down his side, and when Dave checked them in the bathroom mirror, he was shocked. He had thought maybe they were a rash, but the bumps looked less like pustules and more like lesions. The little bumps seemed to be spreading, and Dave didn't like the scaly patches of skin between them either. What the hell? He breathed, shivering as his fingers slid over the spots. It felt kind of nice, tickly even, but Dave made a mental note to call the doctor the next day. He'd been meaning to talk to Dr. Malcolm for a while anyway. The weight gain he was experiencing had gone beyond the normal holiday pudge, and the dreams were becoming worse and worse each night. The guests at the table now seemed to be changing before his eyes, eating the turkey as they grew round and squat, their limbs shrinking as their bodies twisted. Their skin would brown, crisping until it looked burnt, and as they all turned to look at him, Dave would come awake with a start. He was becoming worried that there might be something in the turkey that was affecting them negatively. He had noticed Claire and Sylvia seemed to be getting rounder as the days went by, and there was definitely more waddle to their gait than actual stride. He could see himself getting stouter as well, and with the exception of Ella, he felt like all of them might be experiencing a certain amount of binge eating. He could see his family fattening up, but for what? Dave thought for the first time then about getting rid of the turkey, but he wondered how his family would take such an action. Ella would be elated. She'd been cooking her own food to get away from the constant stream of turkey, but Sylvia and Claire would be outraged. They had turkey for breakfast, lunch, and dinner most days, and Dave realized that he was just as guilty. What had started as a cost-saving measure had become an obsession, and Dave wasn't sure he could bring himself to part with that cursed bird either. As he climbed into bed, something made all the more difficult as he had gotten fatter. He put his hand on something coarse that had made its way under his pillow. As he rolled under the covers, Sylvia already snoring beside him, he pulled it out and was surprised to find a handful of feathers under his pillow. He checked his pillow, thinking maybe there was a hole in it, but he couldn't find a source. He was tired by the time he got done and decided to get some sleep. He'd make an appointment tomorrow. Maybe Dr. Malcolm could shed some light on all this. Dave felt the phone shake in his hand as he made the call. The phone number to Bright Farms had been easy enough to find, but as it rang and rang, Dave became worried that no one would pick up. They had to have answers. They had to be responsible for this turkey, after all. Someone had to have some answers, otherwise Dave thought he might just go crazy. Dr. Malcolm certainly hadn't been able to give him any. Dr. Malcolm had only offered more questions. "I don't know what to tell you," Malcolm had said, running his hand over the bumps as he pressed against them. Dave had shuddered. The bumps had spread to his back, and he felt humiliated by the whole experience. He'd been sitting in his gown, 50 pounds heavier than the last time he'd been here a few months ago, feeling like a freak as the bumps covered his ample flesh. As he got undressed, he noticed he had some of them that had migrated to his chest as well, and Dave hoped that Doc might be able to give him some good news. They aren't pustules or folliculitis, and there doesn't appear to be any drainage from them that I could see. They don't ooze when squeezed, and the x-rays don't show any growths below the skin. It's not a rash or something dermatological. I can't really tell what's going on, but it almost seems like... He stopped himself, shaking his head as he flopped onto the spindly stool near the wall. "What?" Dave asked, ready to grasp at any straw he might offer. "It almost looks like under a bird's feathers. After you pluck them, their skin looks a lot like that. But that's stupid," he added, laughing a little as he made a note on Dave's chart. Dave agreed, chuckling a little, though he didn't think it sounded so stupid. He had looked up the number shortly after getting home. Dave didn't know what he expected this Bright Farms to tell him, but he knew he needed answers. In his mind, these guys would know what was going on. Maybe they could help shed some light on the situation. With every ring that passed, Dave was more and more certain that no one would pick up. The number would be old. They'd be closed. No one would know what he was talking about. No one would... Someone picked up on the sixth ring, just as Dave was getting ready to hang up. "Bright Farms General Store, Thomas here. How can I help you?" Dave was stunned for a moment, the man having to say hello a couple of times before finally finding the saliva or the words to speak. "Yeah, we bought one of your turkeys this year for Thanksgiving." "Uh-huh," the man said, David hearing a scritch-scratch of a pen. "If you're trying to make a return, you can take it back to the store. We don't have any special return policy or anything." "No, I was just trying to get some information on your products. My turkey seems to be coming back after I cut it, and I'd like to know if there's any side effects from this kind of thing." "Coming back?" the man said. And then Dave heard him gasp, but not like someone who's surprised. He gasped like someone who's seen a celebrity. "Oh my goodness, it's you! You're one of the chosen ones! I've never got to meet one of you before the change. This is amazing. It's an honor, sir. I hope you know how lucky you are. He only chooses a handful every year, and it happens to less than 1% of all those that buy our birds." "What are you talking about?" Dave asked, not sure what to make of all this. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's been 3 weeks. I assumed you'd have already noticed some changes." "What exactly are these changes?" Dave asked, hearing the front door open as the kids came home from school. Ella went straight to her room as she had every day, but Claire made a beeline for the kitchen. Dave could see her as she waddled in, her own change even more noticeable than his own. As she opened the fridge, he was unsurprised to hear the sound of the seal coming off the turkey container. He saw his daughter, normally very athletic and energetic, laboring to breathe as she put the turkey and gravy on a paper plate. Her ankles had begun to thicken, and Dave almost thought he could see something like scales in the patches of flesh between her socks and jeans. Her teacher had called last week about her poor performance, and about how she'd been eating in class, which was not allowed. She'd been sneaking extra turkey to school to eat between meals, and her teacher was threatening to give her detention if she didn't stop. "Well, dry patches of skin, bumps, weight gain, sharpening of the bone structure. Have you noticed any feathers appearing randomly yet? That's a big tell." She came out of the fridge with her cheeks already bulging with turkey, and Dave couldn't help but notice the feathers in her hair. As she walked to her room, the plate piled high, the turkey feathers wafted down from her lustrous brown locks. "Don't worry, pal," Thomas went on, clearly grinning on the other end of the phone. "I know this is a lot to take in. We'll send someone over real soon to help walk you through it. Before you know it, you'll also have a new home in the field." Dave let the phone fall to the floor, his feet taking him towards the bathroom in a wobbly gait. He leaned in close as he looked at himself in the mirror, smoothing out the skin on his face as he looked. His face seemed normal, but Dave couldn't help scrutinizing every feature. The bags under his eyes made sense. His dreams had been plagued by the eating dream for almost a month. His skin appeared plumper, but still normal, though Dave couldn't help but see things that may or may not be there. Was his nose sharper? Were his eyes smaller? He looked under his neck, the double chin now very prominent, and he thought there might be some bumps under there too. Maybe one of those chins looked a little like a wattle. He tried to tell himself that it was all in his head, but the longer he looked, the more certain he was that nothing was as he remembered. "What are you doing?" came a voice from behind him, and Dave realized that Sylvia had come home. He turned to tell her everything was okay, but as the tears started falling, Dave fell heavily to his knees and clutched at her. "I'm scared, Sylvia. I don't know what's going on. I'm changing, and I don't know what..." But she put a finger on his lips, and she stooped down, bringing her face close to his. He could see the bumps rising up her neck as they came close, and the longer he looked at her face, the more her nose began to look like a beak. "You're just hungry, dear. Come on, let's get some dinner in you. You'll feel better after that." Dave tried to shake his head, but as she helped him up to lead him to the table, he became less and less sure. Claire was already waiting for them, her eyes glazed over a little as she stared into space. Sylvia was at the table too, feathers rising from the neck of her sweater. And Terry was there too, his nose having taken on the sharp point of a beak as he turned to look at Dave. When he opened his mouth, nothing but a gobble came out, and Dave felt his fear rising up again as Sylvia sat him down beside the turkey man. He wanted to run, he wanted to deny all this, but when she sat the golden brown idol before them, he felt the drool slide down the corners of his mouth and knew that he couldn't leave. They all fell on the bird, ripping and eating as the meat returned as pristine as always, again and again. Dave's fears were nothing before the bird, and as he ate, the people around him grew and grew. Their bodies changed, their features twisted, and when Dave tried to mention it, nothing came out but a thick guttural warble. Soon he wasn't even grabbing the meat anymore. His hands had shrunk into useless wings, and they were all digging mouthfuls of flesh with their sharp beaks. A scream turned their heads towards the living room, and they could all see Ella as she stood in confusion. She retreated then, her door slamming from farther down the hall, but it hardly seemed to matter. The rafter of turkeys turned back to their dead cousin and continued to eat, growing fatter and fatter as they gorged themselves. Thomas found the door unlocked, and as he and his brothers and sisters came into the house, he smiled at the scene before him. 5 fat turkeys, still picking at the bones of their meal as they warbled and gobbled. 3 hens and 2 toms. Not a bad haul at all. They made quite a mess, but that was okay. There would be nothing here for the police to find when they came to investigate. Certainly nothing to tie them to Bright Farms. "Load them up," Thomas said, his family going to work. "We got a few more stops to make before we head back." They herded the birds out the door, running them towards the truck that they had pulled up to the front door, so they didn't have to chase any of them. There were always questions when people saw them running down the road in their overalls and Amish dresses, which led to other unexplained disappearances. It was always better when they came to see the light on their own, but converts sometimes had to be made rather than found. "Who are you? What's going on?" Thomas looked over and saw a girl coming up the hallway. She looked to be about 12 or 13, and scared out of her mind. It appeared that the siren song of the bird had ensnared her, but Thomas knew there was a greater call than that of the turkey. He bent down, giving her his widest smile, as she looked at him with open fear. "My dear, have you ever heard of the Bright? I find it helps put things in perspective during trying times like this." Dave had never been so happy in his whole life. Being a turkey was easy. Eat, sleep, make little turkeys, and wander the fields around his new home. There was no job to go to, no mortgage to pay, no parties to attend, no conversations to carry, no expectations to live up to. No, he thought as he dug his beak into the ground for more bugs, he was wrong about expectations. Even as a turkey, there was one expectation. He looked up as a group of birds was led to the waiting trailer, their heads held high as they waddled to their destiny. Dave could see a few of them that seemed to have a slight glow inside them, and he knew how lucky they were. There would be some new faces in a few weeks, and Dave knew that soon it would be his turn as well. Easter, or maybe next Thanksgiving, and then he too would fulfill his own expectation. Maybe his glow would grow before that day, and he would be responsible for ushering in some new faces as well. Someone called the turkeys to lunch, and the rafter came running. Dave looked up at the smiling girl holding the bucket and thought he recognized her for a moment. She looked familiar, her long dark hair in a braid, and a name tried to work its way to the surface before Dave pushed it down, even as he pushed his face into the trough. That was something he had cared about before he'd been a turkey, and the food in the trough was the only thing he cared about now. Eat, sleep, make little turkeys, and grow fat. That was how a turkey fulfilled his destiny. Still here? Well, that's good. I was afraid maybe I'd put you off your victuals with that last one. Though, if that's put you off, I'm sure the next one isn't going to do a lot of better. We're going from human turkeys straight into the next scariest thing, COVID. We all did some pretty interesting things during lockdown. Me personally, I'm hoping that you bettered yourself. Maybe you took an online course, or maybe you just binge-watched a show that made you feel good. Well, the subject of today's story made a little money off of his misfortune, but it might have been in pursuit of something he didn't quite understand. So it's always good to be careful when you're in the midst of a fever dream. I looked at the ad, unsure if my fever-addled brain was reading it right. Wanted, someone to infect me with the COVID-19 virus. Must be verified as sick, have paperwork verifying illness no older than 2 days from today's date, and be willing to allow me to spend time near them. Will pay $500 for 8 hours in your company. Contraction of virus notwithstanding. Please email me immediately, with an email address attached. I had only been infected by the virus for the last 3 days, but I had been affected by it for the last 2 months. I had been laid off from work after a drop in profits had caused the store to go into bankruptcy. My boss had been very apologetic, but he still hadn't been able to keep the doors open. We had all hit the unemployment line after that, but unemployment wasn't as good as overtime. I'll admit, I had been living a little outside my means, and the bills were starting to pile up. Getting sick had ended my job search, and $500 was going to go a long way to settling my debt and keeping the lights on. And all that for letting a stranger hang out in my house for 8 hours sounded like a dream come true. I contacted him, and he offered to come over that very night, cash in hand. We discussed hours. I'm a dedicated night owl, and he agreed to come over at about 6 p.m. His knock dragged me out of my stupor at around 5:45, and I staggered up to get the door. I didn't expect to be greeted by a well-dressed man in his mid-30s. I'd expected a weirdo, maybe some disease fetishist who got off on being sick, but this guy was surprisingly well put together. He wore black slacks, a button-down shirt, no mask, and his brown hair was close-cropped with a square pair of little gold glasses that made him look like a banker. He shook my hand, something no one had done in a while, and took an envelope of money out of his pocket. He showed me 5 crisp $100 bills, and then I led him into the living room. He sat in my armchair, leaning in close as I sagged back onto the couch and stared at me intently. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just whatever you usually do. Watch TV, play video games, whatever. Hopefully my proximity will be all it takes to get the disease, and I'll achieve my goal." "I had wondered about that," I said, sneezing into a Kleenex and wincing as he leaned in closer. "This disease is supposed to be pretty bad. Why exactly do you want it?" "I'd tell you, but honestly it would sound crazy," he said with a chuckle. I shrugged. "It's not like we got anything else to do but watch Netflix for 8 hours. Tell me, it'll make the time pass." He glanced over at my bookshelf, eyes roaming as though he was looking for something particular, before settling on and taking a paperback from the middle. It was a newer book, Fields of the Foregone, and he nodded as he inspected the spine. He must have liked what he saw because he smiled and held the book out to me. "I see you're a fan of my work. I'll sign it for you if you want, but my books are part of the reason I'm here." I squinted at him. Are you Timothy Corvin? The guy who writes the Ghostgrass series?" He nodded. "Yep, 3-time New York Times bestseller." I gaped at him for a few seconds before asking my next question. "Why the hell are you at my apartment trying to get sick?" He smiled, but the smile was sad. "You could say that the writing is why I'm here." He sat down again and made himself comfortable before telling me the strangest story I'd ever heard. "I got sick about a month ago. It came on quickly, cough, fever, typical flu-like symptoms. But I assured my agent that it wouldn't be an issue. I'd finish my latest novel and have it on her desk by the end of the month. First couple of days weren't so bad. I was still lucid, and I managed to get some work done. I was trucking right along, making good progress, when the real sickness hit. Suddenly I was feverish, scatterbrained, and I could hardly focus long enough to get off the couch. I spent my days in a stupor, high on cold medicine and barely coherent. My nights consisted of rolling around in a fever-fueled daze that made me question whether I was dreaming or awake. I had these dreams, you see. I say dreams because I can't remember them, but I couldn't do anything but remember them then. I would sit on the couch and mumble about them all day, reeling through their world as I tried to wrap my head around them. I raised an eyebrow at him. It sounds pretty bad. Sounds like you didn't get a lot done. Oh, quite the contrary. The longer I raved about the stories, the more I started to write about them. Not so much writing, I guess. I read through my notes the other day, and it was more like drunken ramblings. At some point, I moved on to chronicling them. I would come to at my computer, banging away at a story, not sure what I was doing or how long I'd been doing it. The stories were great, but they were so far outside of what I normally did that I couldn't wrap my incoherent brain around them. As the fever started getting worse, I would slip into these fugue states and just write for hours on end. One day I came out of one and found I had an email from my agent. I had sent her a draft for one of the stories. I was so worried. These stories were really weird, completely batty, and I was afraid that she would drop me as a client if she read what my fever-swallowed brain had cooked up. He took a sip from his coffee then, wetting his pipes, and my own fever-addled brain became a little impatient. So, what did she think? Oh, she loved it. She said it was the most unique thing she had ever read, the most unique thing she had read in ages, and wanted to know when I was going to be done with it. Reading through what I had sent her and the stuff I was working on before I got better, I can see what she was talking about. It is both similar to so many things and completely different. It's a timeless story that sits completely outside of the normal processes. It seems to contain two antagonists and no hero, a war with nothing but loss and stakes that don't seem to make any sense. It was almost Lovecraftian, and I found myself as interested in hearing how it turned out as she was. But that was where the problem arose. He looked at my glass of water longingly, and I slid it across the table to him. If he wanted to get sick, then more power to him. He was paying after all, so he might as well get his money's worth. He reached out and brought it to his lips, throat working as he swallowed. I tried not to gag. There was probably backwash in that. My meds were squashing the fever that was keeping my brain in its altered state of mind. I was always careful never to ride it for too long, but the high was more than a little intoxicating. I would time travel in those moments, starting on my couch and coming to at my computer as I finished more pages than I'd ever done. I throttled back on my meds a little, wanting to stretch this out for as long as I could, but eventually my body started to get better. My fugue states became fewer and fewer. I found that I couldn't tap into that hidden world, and the story wasn't something that I could just make up as I went along. It was unknown, unheard of, and my mind couldn't begin to tap into that place by itself. My agent was wild to have more, wanting an ending, wanting a sequel, and that's when I started thinking about contracting it again. I lifted an eyebrow at him. I know that's what brought you here, that's what you told me on the phone, but I still have a hard time believing that you want this crap. It's miserable. Between the headaches and the near-constant fever, I seem to mostly exist in a state of misery. Some people are experiencing it even worse than I have. What if you get the kind that's really bad and you're hospitalized? It seems like that would put a damper on your writing. He shrugged. That's the thing. Even when I'm experiencing the same symptoms as you, I still get the urge to write. I don't know if it's subconscious or what, but my brain takes over and forces my body to keep writing. Maybe it's not even my conscious mind. Maybe it's this place, and I've been tapped when I'm in these fugue states. I've had this thing 3 times now, you know. If I had had water in my hand, I would have probably did a spit take. 3 times? My God, you rarely hear of anybody getting it more than twice. After I got better the first time, I was struggling to keep up, he said, suddenly looking far away. I tried faking it, but it just wasn't the same. My agent started to notice. She started to send my stuff back with notes like, "I need more of the voice you had in the first draft." I started getting desperate. She told me that she shared my notes with some of her colleagues, and they were very excited about how it was all coming together. So I started putting the pieces together and decided that I needed to recreate the situation. "You needed to get sick again," I said. He nodded. I needed to get sick again. I started slowly, waiting in hospitals and waiting rooms, looking for sick people, but I became desperate after a while. I got lucky the first time, a chance encounter with a sick friend. One trip to their apartment, and I was back where I started, feverish and coughing on my couch as I waited for the time skips to start. Did they? Would I still be running the ad if they hadn't? This time, though, something was different. This time I was treated to some of the most vivid dreams I've ever had. I wasn't just hearing about my two antagonists. I could see them. I watched them play their shadow games, maneuver their pieces, snatch territory only to lose it again. All the while I was chronicling them. It became a mania for me. I refused to take anything to dull the fever this time, but it didn't seem to matter. After a week, my fever was abating, and I was back to trying to fake it. But I couldn't fake it. I wouldn't even try. I needed the dreams. I needed the visions. I needed the writing fits that I never remembered. That was when I started running the ads. The lady at the paper didn't want to run them at first. She said I was sick, but once I offered to pay her triple the going rate, she caved. As I watched him talk about it, I reflected that he did look pretty sick. Not physically, but mentally, I mean. He looked like an addict describing his favorite drug. As he talked, he scratched at his arm, his face taking on a smiling rictus as he described the visions. I began to wonder just how this disease, or maybe it was the story that had affected him. I wanted to tell him to leave off for his own good, but I really did need the money. I've sunk nearly $5,000 into getting this disease. Did I tell you that? Every time I post the ad, someone responds. After so many, though, my body has built up antibodies to it, and every time I get it, it's a little less effective. The last time I contracted it, I barely had it for a week. I was so anxious to get any work out of it that I don't think I got more than 30 pages the whole week. 30 pages? I gasped. I was no writer, but that seemed like a prolific amount of work for a sick person. I know. What a disgrace. The first time I was nearly averaging 30 pages a day, but after the first time I never managed it again. You were getting that much a day? His eyes glazed a little. He didn't seem pleased with what he saw, and he looked at my popcorn ceiling. I see them constantly. I simply can't make sense of it on my own. I can't convey something like storms battling for supremacy, tectonic plates crashing against each other as they try to change the land. The fugues allow me to tap into something primal that could understand these ideas. My puny lizard brain just can't make anything out of it. You know, reading these things I've written, understanding only enough of what I've written, scares me a little. "How much of your book have you written?" I asked, not sure I wanted an answer. He scratched again, still uncomfortable, but wanting to discuss his drug of choice nonetheless. I've written 5 books. I've cataloged the lives of these two from the moment of their birth to the very last encounter they had directly. I gaped at him. He was talking about 5 books in what must have been a matter of months. I couldn't even consider something like that, and I began to wonder how large they were. The pages, the volume he was talking about per day surely meant that these were no small books. He didn't seem to understand where these stories were coming from either, which made them all the more mysterious and unknown. Can you tell me about them?" He gave me a dead-eyed look, and I almost regretted asking. It's not something people really want to know in the end. This little experiment started as a way to write the next great fantasy series, but my agent stopped returning my emails about 3 weeks ago. The last 2 endeavors have been solely so I could learn how it ends, how we end. We? Humanity. We are the ultimate prize that these 2 creatures fight over. More specifically, they fight over the right to subjugate and entertain themselves with us. We see their battles as normal. We see their battles as nothing but the changing of the seasons, but they see them as nothing short of war. I can tell you, but you won't want to know once I'm done." I didn't really want to know anymore, but I felt like I had to know. In the end, my curiosity was stronger than my fear. He spent the next 10 hours telling me about the battle between the Green Man and the Pale Lady. He told me of their beginnings in Strange, their emergence, and their eventual exile, and how they came to be on this plane of existence in the first place. He told me about the Brandylow, the servants of the Pale Lady, and the numerous agents of the Green Man. He told me how this green warrior was worshipped as a pagan deity, how he took his sacrifices, and how he sought out those who ran. It's funny how 10 hours can seem like a half hour when someone is telling you about the eldritch deities that you never knew you wanted to know about. When the alarm on my phone went off, reminding me to take my meds, I realized that it was 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. Timothy got up, checking his own phone, and seemed to realize that he'd been talking all night. "Seems I've gone over my time a little. Here, as promised," he said, taking out the money and handing it to me as he left. "Wait," I said, dropping the envelope and coming shakily from the couch. "How does it end?" He looked back and shrugged. "Hopefully I'll find out. If I do, I'll let you know." Then he left, and I wouldn't hear from him for another 3 months. Well, I'd never hear from him again, but he would make good on his promise. I felt better by the end of the week, my fever breaking and my headache getting better and better. I finally acquired a negative test and started looking for work again. I got lucky. The bar up the road was hiring, and they needed someone to start right away. They had only recently been allowed to reopen, and the bartender was working double duty as the barback to help out. Before I knew it, I was bussing tables and hauling kegs like an old pro. I enjoyed the work, though it wasn't something I'd ever done before, and it felt nice to get back to work after a long absence. Then, one afternoon, I was helping my boss open, flipping on the TV and preparing to tune in to one of the sports channels like I often did. That's when I saw the little squib on the news that made me stop. The city is mourning the death of local writer Timothy Corvin, who died of COVID-related symptoms in St. Graham's this morning. Mr. Corvin, the writer of the Ghostgrass series, is survived by his father and his older sister. Service will be held Tuesday for his friends and family at... I couldn't believe it. The guy had been in my house not even a month ago. Had I killed him? Had he contracted his fatal disease from me? I had to sit down. I didn't know what to make of it. My boss must have noticed that something was off because he tried to send me home, wondering if I still had some latent symptoms of being sick. I told him I was fine, though, and I went back to work. As I worked, I wondered if he'd discovered the end he was looking for. I got my answer in the mail a couple of months later. A package was waiting on the stoop. I hadn't ordered anything, and the return address was from Samantha Drummond. The delivery address was mine, though, so I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a manuscript, bound in twine with no title across the surface. On the top of the journal was a typed note from Mrs. Drummond informing me of her package's purpose. "Hello. My brother requested that I send this to you after he passed. He was very adamant that it be placed in your care. All the best, Mrs. Drummond." I lifted out the journal, opening the front page and bearing a message written in a shaky hand. "I found the end. Let's hope it helps you after I'm gone. I've been sitting here looking at the book for close to an hour, not sure whether I should read it or just burn it. If the beings Timothy had talked about had been using his infected body as a mouthpiece, I'm not sure I want to open my mind to them. This book contains their history, contains their past, present, and future, and this knowledge was gained at the cost of a life. Will they come to infect me if I subject myself to this arcane wisdom? That knowledge scares me more than a little as I put the journal back in the box and carry it to my room. I decided to put it in the closet for now. Some things are better left unknown, I think. Nothing like a little cozy exchange of extremely viral substances to get you in the mood for more stories. So, let's move on. School may be well behind some of you, but you likely remember having to get a little bit of extra credit. Maybe you retook a test, maybe you redid some homework, maybe you painted your teacher's house. I actually did that one year. It bumped me up from a C to an A, so that was good, though I'm not entirely sure it was legal. So let's hear about what this student does to get himself a little extra credit. I don't usually do this kind of thing, but I'd fallen behind in my studies. I've always been an honor roll student. I had some B's here and there, but mostly fantastic grades. I wasn't big into extracurricular activities, but I was a library assistant, and I did a little volunteer work for the required hours I needed to graduate. That all changed when I turned 17. My parents had gotten me a car for my birthday. Nothing fancy, but 4 wheels and an engine is always nice. But it came with a caveat. If I wanted to drive it, I needed to pay the insurance on it. This led me to pick up a job, which led to a lot of closing shifts at my local fast food chain and not a lot of time for studying or doing homework. So when Mr. Castleberry told me I was going to fail 12th grade English if I didn't bring my grades up, I asked him if there wasn't something we could do to work this out. I admit extra credit, maybe a makeup assignment or retake a test, but it seemed he had other ideas. He looked around as if what we were going to talk about was likely to get him in trouble, and then he scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. When I asked him what it was, he told me to open it when I got to my car, not to tell anybody. He refused to say anything else about it after that, and as I sat in the front seat of my car reading the message, I was a little weirded out. I mean, you saw these sorts of situations in adult films or in the back of Hustler magazines, but you really never thought it would happen in real life. Meet me at my house at 7:30, before sunset. Be prepared to stay till dawn. I started to go back in and tell him there was no way in hell, but I needed this particular class to graduate. Who knows, maybe he just liked to hang out with his students in the middle of the night. I didn't believe that for a second, but I decided that it was worth looking into. If I wasn't comfortable with it, I could always take the bad grade and figure something else out. It worked out pretty good because I was off that night, and Mr. Castleberry lived about 15 minutes from my house. I pulled up outside his house at about 7:15 and saw him peeking out the curtains as I came up to knock. He threw the door open, looking around as if to see if I'd been followed, and then practically pulled me inside by the front of my shirt as he closed and locked the door. He threw about 4 different locks, as well as a chain, and then told me to follow him to the bedroom. I raised an eyebrow. This was a little fast, but I did as he asked and figured we would talk over the particulars once we got there. When I stepped into the bedroom, I noticed that Mr. Castleberry had an odd setup. His bed sat in the middle of a circle that I had a sneaking suspicion might be silver. The walls were covered in holy symbols, and Mr. Castleberry was finishing a circle of salt around the bed as I took it all in. He pursed his lips, clearly not sure how to begin, and sat down on the bed as he tried to figure out how to explain. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to be quick. I have a demon inside me. A demon that only comes out after sunset. Bull, I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was stone cold serious. Hand of God. That's what the circle and the salt is for. I have people I know who come and sit with me and make sure the demon doesn't escape somehow. But sometimes I have to ask my students to stand in. I just need you to sit here and watch me until dawn. After that, you'll have your A. I sighed, thinking this over. It appeared he didn't want anything sexual, but he was certainly after something weird. Mr. Castleberry had always seemed like such a normal guy. Who would have thought he was clearly some kind of weirdo who thought he was possessed by a demon or something? Whatever, I thought. An A was an A, and I needed to pass the class. Okay, so what do I do if this thing gets out? Mr. Castleberry was getting comfy in bed. There's a box beside your chair. Use what's in there. The gun is a last resort. The bullets in it are very expensive, so I hope you're a good shot. Don't call the police and don't invite anyone over. You got that? I nodded, reaching down beside the chair and finding the box as he got comfortable. Good. Sun's going down, so it won't be long. Oh, the demon will try to tempt you. Just make sure you don't listen to anything he has to say. There's earplugs in the box, but I don't recommend you use anything electronic to block him out." "Why not?" I asked, taking a battered old Bible and cross out of the box. The gun inside was a heavy old revolver, and it looked like it would blow a hole through a barn if I used it. There were earplugs, a spray bottle labeled HW that I assumed would hurt the demon too. When Mr. Castleberry didn't answer, I asked him again as I looked up. He was lying on the bed, arms crossed over his chest as he mouthed the words to a prayer I didn't know. He was speaking in Latin or Spanish or something, and as the sun got lower, he seemed to be fighting to finish it. His tongue was getting heavy, his words growly, and he was twitching like an epileptic. As the sun slid down the horizon and true dark overtook the town, his eyes popped open, and I heard a sound like someone popping all their vertebrae at once. He roared like a charging rhino, and his body contorted on the bed like someone being flayed alive. I jumped as he writhed on the bed, knocking over the chair as I went for the door. I needed to call the hospital. This was beyond a joke. He needed help. "No!" Mr. Castleberry forced out. "Don't leave! Stay till dawn! Only wait!" But that appeared to be all I would get from Mr. Castleberry. He went limp then, falling back on the bed as a soft and satisfying growl left him. As he lay there, I watched as his chest rose and fell. What was going on with him? Was he actually possessed? I shook that thought off. I had been raised Catholic, but the older I got, the less sure I was that God even existed. If there was no God, then there was no devil, so there were no demons either. That meant that the school board was just letting someone like Mr. Castleberry teach kids with whatever mental illness he had going on, probably schizophrenia or multiple personalities or something. I didn't know, but if I had to stay here all night to get an A, then I supposed I would. I was going to be tired at work tomorrow, but I had Sunday off, so I could always recuperate then. Ah, yes. The Sabbath is a good day to rest. It was good enough for the Almighty, at least. So I suppose it's good enough for you, too. I felt my breath stick in my throat. The voice I had heard from the bed had been as different from Mr. Castleberry's as sandpaper was to velvet. Whoever was talking sounded like the kind of people who do the kind of ASMRs that get you banned on YouTube. It was the kind of voice that lures kids into wells, kind of voice that lures women away from happy marriages, kind of voice that leaves men questioning their sexuality. I looked up to find Mr. Castleberry reclined on the bed, his head resting on his hand in what was likely supposed to be a seductive pose. His eyes were smoldering, something I hadn't thought them capable of, and his smile was predatory. He was sizing me up like a predator preparing to spring, and I felt my skin erupt in goosebumps. Mr. Castleberry? It laughed, and I felt like I should join it, but forced myself not to. The old man has gone to bed, but you can talk to me if you want. My name is Satan. I scoffed. No way in hell. I'm sure Satan has better things to do than bother my English teacher. Very astute. The Spanish girl he brought in last time screamed and ran out of the room when I told her that. I see you have a thicker skin, though. You may call me Raish. And what may I call you? I started to tell him, but I seemed to remember something about telling a demon your name and decided not to give him my real name. Sam, I said, earning a wide, toothy grin from the imp. Astute and cagey. I like that. So how about you break that salt circle and let me out? I'm sure we could have some fun before this old fuddy-duddy gets up. Wouldn't And the silver hold you inside too? I asked dubiously. Raish peeked over the bed and chuckled. That crafty old duck. Who knew he could afford that much silver on a teacher's budget? Well, no matter. If you step inside the circle, breaking it with your foot, then it isn't a circle, and I can come out. Come on. What do you say? Found myself considering it. I had actually prepared to stand up when I realized what I was doing. I didn't really know anything about this creature. A change my mind had made from mental disease to creature. And I was just going to trust him? No, I didn't think so. I planted my bottom and shook my head. I don't think so, I said, and was surprised to find that I was almost apologetic. Ray shrugged. Of course not. Why would you release me for free? Why wouldn't you want to get something out of this after all? So what is it you want? What is this old man offering you to keep watch over me? I floundered, finally deciding on the truth. An A in his English class. It sounded lame, and when Raish laughed, I knew he had thought so too. A meaningless mark of completion. I could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. Get you any one person, any 12 people you desire, or set you up in such a way that not graduating from school would be the least of your worries. I could do so much for you, and I don't even need to take your soul. I just need you to free me. It's been so long since I was free to roam the night, and I'm so very hungry. He had been weaving a spell around me, drawing me into his promises, but that last brought me back to my senses. What would this thing do if it got loose? Who would it hurt if it was just allowed to roam the night? I shook my head, trying to get the invasive words out of my skull, and when I turned back, Mr. Castleberry, or Raish, or whoever he was, looked disappointed. A pity. I really could have done more for you than this old stick. I ignored him after that, though he did not return the favor. I'd brought some books so I could work on my homework, but he was talking too much for me to concentrate. I spent a few hours trying to complete my geometry homework while he offered to help, offered to give me the answers, offered to do things I'd rather not think about, and 100 other such offers. He also threatened me, offered 1,000 different punishments for not letting him out, only to walk them back a moment later and apologize. I checked my watch as I finally closed the book and discovered it was only 10:30. I'd been at this for 3 hours and didn't seem to be going by quickly. Only 8 more hours till sunrise, he said, guessing the source of my sighs. Plenty of time for you to change your mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the earplugs, pushing them in and taking my American history homework out. 2 hours of mostly silence later, I put it away and looked up to find Raish looking at me a little too intently. I yawned, getting sleepy as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through TikTok. I couldn't hear it, and as I reached for my headphones, I remembered what Mr. Castleberry had said. He had warned me about using electronic headphones, but I figured one probably would be fine. Besides, they had noise reduction on them. That had to count for something. Raish tried to call out to me when I swapped the earplug for a headphone, but I ignored him as I popped it in. I was listening to a 2-minute story about something or another, but as I scrolled to the next one, I was surprised to find it was a live stream from a familiar room. I could see myself sitting there, face glued to the phone, but as I watched, Raish looked straight at the camera and smiled. I was infuriated. Mr. Castleberry was just live streaming himself as he scared some dumb kid of the week. In fact, the title of the stream was High School Kid Tormented by Demon, though demon was in air quotes. He had tricked me. Why would he do that? Why indeed? Raish asked, staring at me through the camera as if he could see me through the phone. What do you owe him? He made a fool of you online. What if your friends saw this? What would they think? You'd be a social outcast. Why not give them something to watch? I bet you'd love nothing more than to wrap your hands around this fool's throat and choke the life out of him. Do it. No one would know. Just walk over here and... I was getting up, but as I took a step towards the bed, alarm bells rang in my head. Raish was messing with me. Looking back down at my phone, I could see it was just a generic TikTok shop stream. And when I looked back up, Raish was so close that his nose was pressed against the barrier. Come on, just one more step, and you can do whatever you want to him. Kill him, kiss him, do his laundry. I don't care. Just let me out, he bellowed, and I stumbled back into my chair as he laughed. After that, I just watched TikTok with the subtitles on. I didn't trust my ears anymore. I made it till 2, but after that, my yawns started to sneak up on me. I wished I'd brought an energy drink or something. I wasn't used to staying up this late, not regularly, and my eyes were getting heavy. I swapped over to an adventure game on my phone, but it kept slipping longer and longer the later I got. I could see Raish watching me, cat-like, as if just waiting for me to nod off. He was tricky, and I wondered if Mr. Castleberry had any coffee in his kitchen. I just had to make it a little longer, just a few more hours, and I was home free. I made it till 3:10 before I lost the fight. One moment I was running my 8-bit knight through my 100th dungeon, and the next I heard someone giggling from the bed. I looked up to find not the leering Raish, but Stephanie Morgan from my math class. She was joined by Tina Feller, Debbie Ross, and half of the cheerleading squad, whose names I was a little foggy on. They were in their underwear and seemed to be beckoning me to come join them. There were comments about long division and making a human pyramid, and as I got slowly to my feet, something seemed off. Where was Raish? He'd been there a minute ago. He might not have been present, but something in their voices as they called me to the bed reminded me of him. It was underneath their voice, something wicked and hidden, and I shook my head and snapped my eyes open not a moment too soon. I was standing at the edge of the circle again. I'd lost 20 minutes, and Raish was cursing like a sailor as he had a tantrum in the middle of the large bed. He was thrashing hard enough to jounce the frame, but not hard enough to disturb the salt. He looked at me with real scorn on his face, clearly contemplating all the terrible things he wanted to do to me. You were so close! The booby trap always gets them! I was wide awake now, but I knew it wouldn't last long unless I found something to focus on. 3 hours. I had 3 hours. Despite the knowledge, I smiled at the old imp. Can't trick me, Raish. No deceitful person will dwell in my house. No liar will stand in my presence. To my surprise, Raish sat back like I'd slapped him. I blinked. That was different. What? Not a big fan of scripture? Raish looked at me sardonically. Obviously. I would prefer if you keep it to yourself in the future. Message received, I thought. Maybe there was more to God than I had thought. So that was how I spent the last 3 hours of my night. I kept the old worn Bible on my lap, and whenever Raish would start trying to worm his way back in, I would begin to read from it. It put him off talking, right up until the sky began to lighten. Then he turned to me, my eyes barely staying open, and delivered one final bit of crypticness. "I don't have much time. When you think back on this night, I want you to remember that you could have had more than this old stick ever..." He growled out. As the first rays of light came up over the windowsill, he twisted violently, so violently that I thought he had broken his neck. He twitched a few more times, screaming hoarsely until he finally settled back into bed. I sighed in relief as he twitched again, realizing it was over as I packed the cross and the Bible back into the box, with the gun and the earplugs and the spray bottle. The spray bottle went in last, and as I secured the lid, Mr. Castleberry sat up and stretched grandly. He blinked and looked at me, smiling as he realized I was still there. "I had a feeling you would be less easy to scare off. As promised, you'll pass with an A now. Here," he said, and to my surprise, he fished $200 bills out of his nightstand. "What's this for?" "I give anyone who works the sundown shift $200 when they're done. There's more where that came from, if you'd like to come back. The number of people who come back, believe it or not, is surprisingly low." I asked him how he could afford this, and he smiled, laughing warmly. "I don't teach for the money. I teach because it's what I love to do. My father set me up before I was born, something I don't think Raish knows. Money doesn't mean the same thing to demons that it does to us, and I think he just sees it as a thing I have. I don't covet it, so he doesn't see it as a vice. $200, I thought, for 12 hours of basically nothing. I could sit 3 nights with Mr. Castleberry and make what I make at the fast food place in a week. I'd have to think about this pretty hard, but I was definitely tempted to come back. I knew what I was in for now, so it would be easier a second time. I knew Raish would probably have more tricks, but maybe I'd be ready, now that I was prepared. Before I left that day, I asked him what the demon had given him to get such control after dark. Mr. Castleberry thought about it for a moment and finally decided to share the secret with me. My mother was sick, very sick, and I was looking for a miracle to make her better. Raishael came to me and offered me a deal. He would possess my body after dark, control me from sun up to sundown, and in exchange, my mother would be spared from the disease that was killing her. I agreed on the condition that he couldn't do anything that would take away my ability to be free during the day. He agreed, but it was all for nothing. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your mother lived, right?" "For a while." He didn't lie. He cured her of the cancer that was eating away at her. The cancer, however, had damaged her kidneys. She lived another 8 months before she died of renal failure. Let that be a lesson to you, should you decide to come back. Demons always promise the moon, but they don't tell you that the cheese is rotten. I left that room $200 richer, and maybe a little wiser, too. Wiser or not, it wasn't the last time I sat with Mr. Castleberry, or Raishael. Poked up the logs a bit more for you. I know it's getting a little chilly in this old house. Maybe I should finally get around to getting my heat upgraded, but I've got this kettle stove, and my window's open just fine in the summer, so let's continue right along, shall we? You've probably seen the sign 1,000 times. Everything must go. Usually it tells you that something's going out of business, maybe a store or a place that sells furniture, maybe even a car lot. But do they mean it? What happens when everything means everything? And what happens when everything must go meant that everything went? My boss was smiling as he tossed the flyer on my desk. I could see Jasper and Marcus turning to smile at me as well as I picked up the notice and scowled at it. I've been at Farseer News for about 6 months now, but it's far from my first brush with journalism. I used to write for a news source in Washington. I won't name them. They probably don't want to be brought into all of this. And before that, I wrote for my college newspaper. That's where I received my degree in English and journalism. And that was back when my future seemed bright. I worked as a journalist for 6 years, but that was before everything went to hell. I won't go into details, but it was a story that everyone said I should have left alone. I wouldn't, though. I was young and still looking for my big break, and the story seemed perfect. It was, I guess, perfectly capable of ripping my career to shreds, that is. When it was all said and done, no one would touch me. Couldn't even get a job cleaning toilets in a building with news ties, and I'd thought it was over. Until the call came from Farseer. It's a paper in Gavin, one of the largest cities in the tri-state area, but it's as far from D.C. as it gets in terms of journalism. Out here I'd be covering cattle auctions and ladies' auxiliary bake sales and state fairs. I started to turn them down, but after some rumination and a lot of alcohol, I decided that it might be just the thing to fix my credibility. Maybe after a few years of writing about less sensational stories, I could go back to writing about, serious topics again. I could fix my image, maybe find a little public corruption to open the shades on, and get on with something more grand. I could work my way back into the industry and get my name back. Then I'd find somewhere away from politics and get back on my feet. I couldn't have known, however, that the head of my department was someone who liked to screw with people. My boss, Andrew, and his buddies, Jasper and Marcus, are as far from journalists as you can get. They all have degrees from the local community college in English or journalism, but the dynamic around the bullpen is more like the one you'd find in the office. Andrew is the Michael Scott of our department, handing down judgments and comedy in equal parts. Marcus is like a less likable Jim, and Jasper is the Stanley, older and constantly sleeping through his deadlines. I guess that makes me the Dwight, and they don't mind using me for the butt of their jokes. You should have seen Andrew during my interview as he realized my credentials. He looked almost gleeful at the prospect of having a real journalist on his team that he could mess with. Case in point, the flyer he had just tossed down was for the closing of a local institution in the neighboring town of Foreman. The closing of a discount warehouse store that had existed on the corner of Beck and Mills since the Depression. "What's this?" I said, looking up from a story that I'd been writing about last week's big event. "That is your assignment for today, old junior field journalist." Junior field journalist was another thing that Andrew had made up to demean me. He knew I'd been a hotshot columnist in the big city and decided to take me down a peg with the big stories he handed down. The stories were everything from dog fashion shows to pumpkins that looked a little like Elvis. He found the obscure stories seemingly from nowhere, and he handed them to me with the air of someone bestowing great honor on a lesser. He mostly did it so he and the other community college journalists could laugh at me as I went off to chase the story. "Can't anyone else do this? I'm working on the governor's Clean Air Initiative piece." "Actually, I sent your notes over to Jasper, so you'd have a free afternoon to give this story your full attention." I ground my teeth and listened to my molars groan like sails in a high breeze. "You did what?" "No need to thank me. I mean, it's not every day that a historic institution like the Discount Warehouse goes out of business. We want your full attention on this story so you can tell us all about the last great sale on this time capsule of Americana. Feel free to use that line if you like," he said, walking off as Marcus and Jasper snickered at me. The whole thing just felt way too much like the actions of a cartoon villain. With little choice left, I packed up my things and went off to chase the story. I was fuming as I drove the 30-odd miles to Foreman. I was tired of being treated this way by people who had learned everything about news reporting from their high school AV club. The stories that the farseer took on were often fluff pieces, and sometimes even borderline tabloid news. For every serious story we took on, there were a dozen others about beauty pageant winners and food-eating contests and pieces just labeled local color. I was sick of being stuck with these nothing filler bits. What's worse is that they weren't even anything you could hang a new career on. No respectable paper would want to see your name attached to a drunken fiddle contest, and no one would be impressed by my dissertation on the Little Miss Southwest regional pageant. I'd been hoping to craft this into a new start, but it looked like I'd be stuck at the farseer for the foreseeable future. The money was nice, though, so I guess that was a plus. The interstate was fairly uneventful, and I arrived in Foreman without too much fanfare. When they tell you that Gavin is the largest city in the tri-state area, they mean it. Gavin, as it happens, has a population of about 25,000 on a good census year. The whole area is very rural, which means there's a lot of very nice cow fields and pigs to look at as you drive. Gavin has 5 restaurants, a city hall, a public pool, a drive-in, several strip malls that are slowly expiring, and a Walmart that's usually being sold by one of the $5 generals in the area. There's 20 traffic lights in the whole town, and the rest of the roads are watched over by stop signs and good manners. If Gavin is a big town, then Foreman is a pothole. You can tell when you're pulling into Foreman because of the seemingly endless array of trailer parks on the outskirts. They have cute little names like Shady Pines and Whispering Oaks or Sunnydale, but what they amount to is a sea of plastic and chrome that stretches for well over 10 miles. I'm pretty certain that the trailer parks are bigger than the whole town, but that's just a guess. As sad as all that humanity on display is, the town is downright tragic. There was once a thriving burg here, I've been told, but it relied mostly on the pulpwood industry and the small coal mining operation that took place in the area. Now the coal's played out, the pulpwood's going out, and Foreman is a town that seems unaware that it's dying. If you drive up the main street, you can see more buildings for rent than that are open. It has a city municipal building that doubles as a city hall, a working railroad that will likely outlive the town, and several strip malls with the usual collection of pizza joints and cell phone stores. A few pawn shops and hardware stores seem to be struggling along, but the only thing in Foreman doing any business is the Moosehead pub and the small local police force waiting for drunks outside said pub. I suppose the lack of business was why I was here, though. I kept expecting to see a Walmart, or at least a Dollar General or a Family Dollar, but the longer I drove without seeing one, the odder it felt. Had Discount Warehouse been that big of an institution? I suppose the little discount chains would pop up like mushrooms, now that Thriftmeyer was forced to loosen his grip on the region. Discount Warehouse sat in a historical building that had once been a Thriftmeyer all-goods store. Mr. Thriftmeyer, who I assume had changed his name for marketing reasons, had owned a chain of Thriftmeyer all-goods stores across the Tri-County area. They rebranded as Discount Warehouse in the late 70s and incorporated furniture and housewares into the business model. Discount Warehouse was more like a small Walmart or a large Dollar General, and the economy had started weeding them out in the late 2000s. This was the last of the Thriftmeyer line, and today would end his legacy as a houseware and small appliance juggernaut. You like that? It's the opening of my article, and all with nothing more than 30 minutes in the car and a Google search. I did a little more looking and discovered that the Thriftmeyers still owned the chain. Thriftmeyer Sr. had died around the time of the rebranding, 1978, it said, but his son was just as business savvy as his old man, it appeared. Jacob Thriftmeyer Jr. had been running his father's store since the mid-20s, and he was still managing the store well into his 80s. The article said that he had hoped to rebrand again and keep the business open, but the bank had other ideas and would no longer extend their loan. The store had been operating in the red for years, and the tab had finally come due. Jacob Thriftmeyer had begrudgingly signed over his business to the bank and was getting ready to enter retirement. I felt for the old guy, but I suppose all good things had to come to an end. I wasn't exactly sure I would call the parking lot I was currently in a good thing, however. The building was a large brick box with a black awning that appeared to have been added after the fact. The doors were not the fancy sliding ones that most stores had, but large glassed ones with handles that jutted out from the front. The concrete parking lot was old and rutted, the pavement in sad need of leveling and replaning. The people who had gathered here looked like cattle at an auction, and they all just sort of milled about aimlessly. There were some kids among them, pale youths holding their parents' hands, and it was here that I saw some emotion. Most of them were jittering around like kids will do, and all of them seemed to possess a certain air of excitement. As I got out of the car, notebook in hand, I went to join the collected humanity. I heard the snap of an elastic from overhead and looked up to see small flags that had been hung on a rope running from the awning to the light poles that dotted the parking lot. They were black and white, the wind pushing them aimlessly, and it made me think of a funeral. This whole event was a funeral, I supposed, and as I got close, a banner fell to block the awning, and the illusion was complete. It was black with white letters, and the sentiment seemed very fitting later on. Everything must go, it proclaimed, and the sight of it gave me the willies. A small stage had been erected, and there was a cheery man in a cheap suit standing beside an old, stooped man in a much nicer suit. He had to be Jacob Thriftmeyer, Jr., but the younger man was unknown to me. He was beaming out at the crowd, looking happy to be there, or anywhere on such a day as this. He glanced towards the sky as the wind snapped at the flags, and his smile seemed to wither a little. The clouds were becoming dark, and it looked like the weather might wash out the last great deal of the discount warehouse. Would everything still go in the rain? I supposed it would, and I was right. I wish I hadn't been. I'm proud to see so many of Foreman's finest out to say goodbye to the city's institution that's been here since the town was little more than a logging hub. Logging hub might have been a stretch, but I supposed this was the mayor of Foreman. I've shopped here with my family for as long as I can remember, and the deals we've all found at the discount warehouse were like nothing seen anywhere else. Jacob Thriftmeyer has helped keep the specter of corporate greed from overtaking our town, and we will be sorry to see him go. Mr. Thriftmeyer himself would like to say a few words, and I think we owe him that much. The applause were scattered and half-hearted, and the old man approached the mic slowly before trying to lower it to his level. The banner kept catching my attention, and it just seemed off somehow. Everything must go. I'd never thought about that statement before, but it was a little foreboding if you looked at it in a certain light. The kind of light that hovered around here, for example. Everything must go. If everything went, then what would be left? Would Foreman remain? Would Gavin be safe? How much would be left behind once everything had gone? The reedy voice of Jacob Thriftmeyer, Jr. brought me back to the stage. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My father opened up Thriftmore All Goods a year before the Great Depression sunk its claws into this country. I have strived to keep his legacy afloat, but it seems I have failed. I have failed this town. I failed all of you. And now we must pay the price. I furrowed my brow as I took a shorthand missive of the speech. This was a weird one, even for the ramblings of a geriatric store owner. The people seemed as confused as he was, but the children seemed to know already. While the parents stood in polite boredom, the children were looking around with what I thought was excitement, but I quickly realized was fear. Their neck hair was up for some reason, and they all seemed on the edge of fleeing. It was like house pets just before a tornado hits. They sense the change in pressure, the change in the air, but they can do nothing but wait for it to hit and hope it doesn't simply squash them flat. That should have been a warning, but I ignored it yet again. I was here to get a story, and I meant to be done with it before the whole day was wasted. This store held the town together, in hard times and good times. Many of you have bought your furniture here for your first place, the crib for your first baby, the groceries for your last meal. But today, it all comes to an end. Today is the final moments of forming. So, drink them in while you can. The mayor was looking at him oddly, some of those who had come to watch looking as if his words had broken through their daze. The children, however, stood straight as fence posts, just waiting for whatever was to come. They seemed to sense the portents, and I remember thinking that some of them might make it out, though I didn't know why the thought had occurred. Make it out of what? What would they need to escape? I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this store has not existed on its own for all these years. When my father opened his doors in 1932, he was full of hope for the future. He just knew that this would bring his family stability, bring them wealth, and so it did. Even through the Great Depression, Dad made money hand over fist, and he was very generous with the community. Foreman thrived because of my father's money, but somewhere along the way, you all forgot that. The mayor's pasted-on smile was beginning to slip, but when he reached for the mic, Jacob Thriftmeyer gave him a stony look, and he backed away. Thriftmeyer was going to say his piece, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. It's true, and you all know it's true. I kept the riffraff out. I kept the Dollar Generals and the Family Dollars, and even the likes of Sam Walton's monstrosity out of this town. And how did you all repay me? You turned your noses up at the local businesses, at the businesses that had made this town great, and you drove to Gavin or Bryson or he spat onto the hot top, McAllister, to shop at Walmart and Target and Costco as the town died around you. You put pennies over people, and now you reap what you have sown. He looked out across the crowd, looking furious with them as they looked down sheepishly. I was astonished. Did he blame them for the fall of his empire? Don't bother looking contrite. I know what all of you think. I know you think that those vultures will be here to nibble my corpse once my store is closed. But you are wrong. You don't live as long as I have without picking up some tricks. And today, I give you all my last deal. He wetted his lips, preparing to speak the words that must be spoken. He turned to the doors, and when he thrust his hands toward them, they opened to reveal the horror they had been holding at bay. Everything must go! As he said it, the doors came open and a thick black smoke came pouring out. It was almost like floating tar, the cloud impenetrable as it hovered out. The effect was galvanizing. The sleepy crowd began to murmur and then to back away. They were unsure what to make of this, but as they got closer, they began to scream and run from the encroaching smoke bank. Some of them, however, stood mesmerized by it. Some walked towards it, and those who disappeared into it were lost within that smoke. I saw most of this, however, from the inside of my car. The final declaration, the negation of the town itself, had moved me as it had moved the doors, and I was bringing my car to life before I realized I had moved at all. The car seemed sluggish to start, the engine making a sleepy grinding noise as it came to life, and before pulling away from the store, I looked back at the old man as he stood atop the podium. His hands were raised in exaltation, his eyes cast skyward, and as the cloud pressed against his back, I thought it might reject him for the briefest of moments. Then it gobbled him up, along with the stunned mare, and I was leaving the lot on squealing tires. As I drove out of town, I saw the smoke rising behind me. It swallowed the town in a plume of thick gray death, but it seemed I was the only vehicle leaving town. The people I passed on the sidewalk, the ones coming out to look at the cloud, seemed to be mesmerized by all that smoke. They didn't run like the others had, the ones out in front of the store, and I was tempted to stop and shout at them. I wanted them to run, to escape the smoke, but most of them seemed to have accepted their fate. The farther I drove, the more I feared that the smoke would never stop and would simply engulf everything. Every mile I drove, the less I believed I would make it home. When I made it to my apartment, it hardly filled me with a sense of serenity. I'm on the couch now, my phone ringing off the hook as the office tries to get a hold of me. They want to know the same thing the news anchors want to know. What happened to Foreman? They say the town is simply missing, the smoke cloud having cleared to reveal raw earth and nothing else. The streets, the buildings, the trailer parks, the main street, everything was gone. It had been removed down to the dirt, and no one seemed to have escaped whatever it was that had happened. They were looking for witnesses, for anyone with information, and my boss and his friends seemed to be doing the same. I guess I was the only one who'd seen what happened, and it was something that would stick with me for a long time. I don't know what to do now, but I know one thing for sure. The sign didn't lie. Everything had to go, so everything went. Fire's starting to look a little peaky, but I think we've got time for one more story while the heat holds out. Until then, clutch your blankets tight around you and hang in there with me, because this one is one of my favorites. Have you ever went on a weird trip? Maybe like a destination kind of thing? You know, you go and do something outside your wheelhouse, maybe something outside the norm. Well, the boys in today's story certainly have, and it kind of came back to bite them in the most horrific way. Well, not the most horrific, I suppose. So let's hear a little story about ducks on the water. My friends and I like to take what we call an adventure weekend about 3 times a year. We met in college while we were brothers in Pi Beta Kappa. There's Jared, Max, and Raj, and me, of course. PBC is a forever kind of brotherhood, but we took it a little more seriously than most. We all live in different parts of the United States, but 3 times a year, we come together for these 3 to 5 day trips that are just epic. We've gone ziplining in Costa Rica, mountain climbing in the Rockies, whitewater rafting in Mexico, and diving in the Bahamas. We've been all over the world, and though it may seem a little excessive, so what? We're 4 unmarried guys with no kids and great jobs, so our income is still pretty much ours to blow as we see fit. So when Max said we should get a houseboat and go trolling up the coast for 5 days, we were all on board, pun definitely intended. So we met at a little port in Mississippi as he introduced us to the Trawler Queen. She was a 2-cabin houseboat with a living room, a party deck, 2 monster motors, and a galley with enough beer and snacks to keep the party going for 7 days and 6 nights. We were stoked, to say the least, and as Max pulled us out of the marina, we knew this was going to be an adventure for the books. That statement would prove to be a little too prophetic. I haven't really properly introduced the guys yet, and it's important that you get the group dynamic down. Me and Jared were the jocks of the group, a pair of gym rats who were constantly on the grind for the perfect physique. Max was our resident cool guy, just a chill dude who liked to party and usually organized our little adventures. Raj was our brain, and most of us probably wouldn't have graduated without him. He was probably the smartest guy in the frat, and he'd helped a lot of us keep our GPAs up so we could keep our various grants and scholarships. We all had our parts to play, like the A-team, and each of us made up for some shortcoming in the group. Max had charted our course so that we could stop sometimes and spend our nights partying in different ports. Biloxi, Long Beach. Finally, we'd end up in New Orleans, where we'd turn the boat into the rental company and get a car back to our original dock so we could get our cars. It was a good plan, but Raj pointed out that his route took us through several large shipping lanes that would likely bring us close to larger shipping vessels, which, were the ones that used them. They'd probably capsize us if we got too close. Might be better to stick to the less busy waterways if we expect to get the deposit back on our rented houseboat. Max brushed it off. If we take these routes, we're better suited to stop in the party ports. Come on, Raj, live a little. Raj furrowed his brow, but he didn't argue. Roger McCormick, an underprofessor at the college that we graduated half a decade ago, might not be a risk-taker, but Raj had learned long ago to roll with the punches when it came with us. It usually came out okay, and Raj enjoyed the adventure as much as the rest of us. We had been out about 3 days, preparing to stop in Gulfport and take on provisions before heading to New Orleans, when we saw something strange in the water. Well, not that strange, I guess. After all, it's not really uncommon to see a rubber duck in the water. It's kind of where they hang. Most of the time it's bathtubs or sinks, though, and not off the coast of Louisiana. I was manning the wheel, playing captain, while Max went and took a break, and when I first saw it, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I wouldn't have seen it at all if it wasn't fluorescent orange and riding a huge wave. It was just one at first, a single little guy bobbing on the waves and smiling happily, but as I watched, I saw more of them come up on a swell. They were ducks. Some of them with sunglasses, ducks with scarves, holiday ducks, ducks in all colors, and as they floated past, I laughed, thinking it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. Hey, guys, I called down to the others who were playing cards in the galley. Come check this out. Max popped up first, as if he expected trouble. When he saw our little escort of colorful plastic borders, however, he laughed too. It was hard not to. The sight of all those ducks bobbing on the surface was just so weird. It was almost a little too weird. What were these ducks doing out here, anyway? The longer I watched them bobbing around, the more it made me kind of nervous as well. Where'd they all come from? Why were they suddenly all around us? It was easy to laugh at them if you didn't ask questions, but hard not to feel creeped out when you stopped to think about why they were here. Why are there so many ducks out here? Asked Jared, watching them flow around the ship as they roiled in the dark water. Well, it could be that they're testing ocean currents and swell patterns. Max had taken the wheel again, a large wave splashing against the bow and sending a few of the ducks onto the deck. He gave Raj a weird look, though. What? Ocean current patterns. Sometimes oceanography institutes will release a bunch of rubber ducks and watch wave patterns and changes in tidal flow. They've got little trackers in them so they can plot their course, which helps them decipher currents and stuff. Jared picked up one of the ducks and squeezed it, eliciting a friendly squeak from the smiling toy. Seems like it'd be bad for the environment. Wouldn't it lead to all kinds of environmental problems? Raj furrowed his brow as Jared squeaked it again before tossing it into the water. He started picking them up and throwing them into the black soup, a few of them skipping across the surface before disappearing into the night. I realized we'd been a little farther from the coast than Max had meant for us to be, though I could still see it. The lights were far away and ethereal. That is weird. The ones they usually use are made out of cork or something biodegradable. Even if they're rubber, they usually don't squeak. We watched them come rolling in as the waves got progressively higher. Something was stirring up the water not too far from us, and Max seemed to be steering us towards it. When I mentioned this, he said he just wanted to see what it was. His curiosity piqued. Might be a ship in distress or something. Maybe we could help him. He had some idea of being a big hero or something, but I wasn't sure that we could do anything if it was a big transport ship. They'd have a lot more people than our little boat could hold. A boat that sometimes felt a little full with 4 people on board. We cruised between a pair of buoys, heading into open water as we looked for the source of the turbulent water and the ducks. The rope color made it pretty clear that the area was dotted with reefs and sandbars, and the little islands that dotted the area made it even clearer that caution was required out here. It'd be real easy to come up on a sandbar and scrape our hull or blow our bottom out on a reef, and then we'd be floating on driftwood all the way to the rental agency to explain how we'd taken our boat somewhere unadvisable. We came up with a little inlet, the GPS telling us we were entering a major transport lane, and that was when we found the source of the ducks. Their transport ship had been massive, likely hauling all sorts of things. Most of it was sinking to the bottom of the ocean. The ship was in the process of joining its cargo, and as it capsized, it was sending up massive waves and tidal surges. The ducks were coming out of a container that had broken open, and as it slipped beneath the water, it spewed out the floating little knickknacks as they scattered on the surface, pushed by the waves. That should have been the scariest part, the sinking ship, but it couldn't hold a candle to the massive tentacles that were wrapping around the hull and dragging it under. They were hard to make out in the dark of the night, but their undersides were cream-colored and covered in suction cups. They were massive, rising into the air as they came slithering from the depths of the ocean. Even from our position, over 100 feet away, I didn't think any of us felt safe. We were on this creature's turf, bobbing on the surface of its hunting ground, and if it wanted us, there was nothing we could do about it. "We need to go," Raj whispered, as if he was afraid the thing could hear him. "We need to go while it's still mangling that ship." Max agreed, and as we pulled away as quietly as we could, the rest of us kept a close eye on those rising tentacles as they descended into the ocean with the remains of the cargo ship. As we came slowly through the reefs and the bars, we kept expecting to feel a tentacle latch around us and drag us down. The ducks just kept coming, the waves of colorful toys no longer as whimsical as they had been. We had been planning to anchor for the night around midnight, but when I sat up out of a stupor the next day and discovered we were pulling into New Orleans, it wasn't a surprise. None of us had said as much, but I think we were all feeling a little less than safe out here after what we'd seen the night before. The rental company told us they couldn't give us a refund for the days we hadn't used, but we told them that was fine. I didn't feel safe until my feet were on solid ground again, and I've never been happier to live in a landlocked state. We had fun with the rest of our trip, exploring the Big Easy and taking in the sights and smells of the city, and after a few nights of leisure, we started to wonder if it had all really happened. Maybe we'd just gotten spooked by all those rubber ducks after having a little too much to drink. Maybe we had a group hallucination. Maybe we just seen something shadowy out in the ocean and jumped to conclusions. 2 nights later, though, while drinking in a little hole-in-the-wall bar, we discovered that it hadn't been just drunken delusions. We were all laughing after our 3rd or 4th pitcher of beer when Raj suddenly sat up a little straighter and looked at one of the TVs behind the bar. He went over to it, asking the barman to turn it up, and as we followed behind him, we caught the tail end of a news report about a ship that had recently gone missing on its way to New Orleans. The story had a picture of a large cargo ship. A ship that we had all watched get drug into the water a few nights ago. And the news lady was talking about how it was a huge mystery for local sailors. The ship, nearly 100% automated except for a crew of 10, was lost at sea somewhere off the coast of Louisiana. While several cargo containers have been found off the coast as well, the ship itself has seemingly vanished. Residents in the area have been inundated with rubber ducks for the last few nights, and there's concern that the ship may have sunk and been pulled out by an errant current. They showed the footage of a massive amount of rubber ducks washing up on the beach near Long Beach. Watching those ducks go in and out with the waves made me anxious in a way I couldn't explain, but didn't need to. It was pretty clear that everyone here was feeling the same, and when the newscaster moved on to another story, we ordered another pitcher and returned to our table. The festivities were definitely a little muted after that, and it was decided that boating was right out for our future trips. I think maybe we'll go to Vegas next year. Vegas sounds nice, especially after what we saw. Oh, I think that'll just about do it for me. This warm fire and the soft blanket and these great stories, of course, have left me tuckered out. I think I'm going to go get a nap before it's time to head back to the real horror story, my day-to-day work experience. But I'm glad that you came and experienced these great tales with me, and I do hope we'll see you again tomorrow for more cozy horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague signing off, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.